All right, so if you are following along with the PDF, it looks like we're on about page 249 or so. Chapter 8, How to Work with Menus and Preferences. By the end of this week, it's either going to be Thursday or Friday, I'm going to test you on chapters 5 through 9. All right? I'm still not sure. I mean, the program that I had you do, the loan amortization program, isn't the greatest program for putting a lot of this stuff in it. But that said, then you wouldn't have to go and create a new app. So there would be some advantages to you doing to you using that, even if yours is still having some trouble. I have yours graded. They're in inside ranking. I'm also going to give them back to you, all right, in just a little bit after we go over the chapter. All right. So you will have, my goal is by around 1:30 or so, right around then, we'll be done with the chapter and going over this. And then you'll have the rest of the period as a lab period today to continue on with your copy of this. Then Tuesday, we're going to go over chapter 9, which are on, I believe they're on Intense Fragments. All right, so they're on Fragments, and we're going to go over that. I went back and I reread chapters 10, 11, and 12. Are they important? Again, it depends on the type of app you plan on eventually creating in here. Okay? They talk about broadcasts and receivers and things like that. And probably you're not going to do something like that in your app. But it's possible you could. So I have already done lectures on 10, 11, and 12. I'm not going to be going over those in here. By the end of the week, it might just be Friday, I don't know. We're going to go start on the next section of the book, and the next section of the book is on databases, all right? Because there is at least a chance that one or more of you may want to incorporate a database component into your app. I think that'd be a great idea if you can do it. And we talk about SQLite, which is kind of a skimmed, watered-down version, all right? But it is an SQL, so it's SQL, and it is a relational database management system. But we will go over chapters 13, 14, 15, and 16. We will do that before the break. All right, are we going to have another test after this one? I don't know. We can squeeze that in or not. Then the day that you get back from the break, all right, that Monday, whatever that is, like that must be the 19th, we'll go over chapter 17, and chapter 17 is how to deploy an app. So it talks about how you have to send it out to the Google Play Store, etc. So we'll go over that. All right, we'll go over all of that stuff. Also, by the time you start working on your assignments today, because I keep forgetting to do it, I'll walk over next door. I'll grab the tablets, so they will be available to all of you. All right. But my hope is then that Tuesday, which is like the 20th, we'll start on Kotlin. We'll do that week and the next week will all be Kotlin. We'll go back and we'll rewrite at least 2 of the apps that we've done using Kotlin. But before we do that, I want to give you 1 to 2 periods just on the Kotlin language itself. All right? Okay. So this chapter, as you can see, is on menus and it's on preferences. The big thing to remember about menus, 2 things. First thing is, are they necessary? Okay? Remember, especially if you're working with a phone, you've got a limited amount of real estate. Okay? So you just may decide that you do or you do not want to create menus. They give you a couple alternatives in here. All right? The other thing that's in here is preferences. Now, they use this in the guise of working with the tip calculator program. Again, one of the things I don't like about this book is all of their end of the chapter exercises, really through like the first 12 chapters, are on the tip calculator. It's not that good of an app. All right, they really should have come up with something else, but they didn't. All right, so as you can see, an introduction to menus, how to define a menu, how to display an options menu, how to handle option menu events, how to start a new activity. All right. Then we get into preferences, how to work with preferences, an intro, how to define them, how to display them in an activity, how to display them in a fragment, how to get preferences, how to use preferences. So all this, how to start, how to handle, how to use, that will involve code. All right, as you'd probably guess. Then they give you some additional skills for working with preferences. All right. Not a long chapter at all. So let's just get into it. You all know what a menu is. You've used menus in virtually everything that you've done in this program. But what they're talking about doing here is creating your own menus. Now, when you look at this, they show you two different ways that you can have menus. All right? And the first basically says that you can set it up that if you do have a menu bar up here, and typically if you're using the later versions of the API, you will. All right, you can set it up so that when you click, that it'll show options over here. All right, if you don't want to do that, you can have it drop down so that they show here. All right, you might look at that and go, oh, geez, I use the second way, it makes more sense. Maybe, maybe not. All right. The first way is it says this is an activity with an options menu that has 2 items on it, and this one is displayed from an action overflow icon, is what they call that. They explain the differences between them right here. All right. So as it says, if the device doesn't have a physical menu button, that's when you're going to get this one right here. And if it does have a menu button, you can go and, I'm going to say program it for lack of better words, so that you have something that looks more like this. Again, for those of you who still may be having some problems with this or don't think my explanation is clear enough or complete enough, etc., I would suggest that you page through the book, look at the examples, and on the bottom of the page that's on the right, read the description for each one of these. Now, they talk about action items next, and if you look on the screen, they try to compare and contrast these. In other words, settings and about, all right? And what they're saying here is, hey, it probably would be better because you'd have more room if you used icons. But if you're going to use icons, you should use icons that people can look at and understand what they mean. All right? In other words, you wouldn't want to create your own icons that wouldn't mean anything to anybody else. All right? You also can, I believe at least, you can set these up because they're tooltips for just about everything you do. I do believe that you can set them up so that you can have tooltips over them. So if you take your mouse and hover over it, you can get a tooltip, which can be helpful also. All right? But again, as mentioned, since you have a limited amount of real estate here, you know, if you had 5 different options, there probably would be no way that you could fit them all up onto that bar if you were going to use text. And it can be even more confusing. Well, I'll just abbreviate. Well, just because you're abbreviating something doesn't mean other people are going to understand what it means. All right? Now, they also say, you know, don't put things in there that literally are not needed. So let's just go over it. All right? It says it's a good idea. This is an action. These are action items. It's a good design guidelines to use action items for a small number of commonly used actions. All right. They can be displayed as text or icons that we just looked at. It says it's generally considered bad design to put items that the user doesn't commonly use in the action bar because it's a waste. All right. Yeah, it might look really cool, but it's a neat looking icon. So what? If no one's ever going to use it, why are you putting it out there? All right. Which is, I believe, what they're saying. There are other things that you can do too. They talk about a floating context menu. What they call a floating context menu, if you set one up, it basically is the equivalent of right mouse clicking. That's a floating context menu right there. All right. Some books call that a pop-up menu. Again, it just depends on the book that you're reading. All right. Because then they say a pop-up menu. Well, there it says it can be displayed when the user clicks on a widget or an action item. All right. So I call that a pop-up, not what they're calling a pop-up. All right. As it says, if your app targets Android 11, API 11 or above, it's a good practice to use contextual action mode instead of floating. All right. There are going to be people who don't realize that they can right mouse click. All right. And again, if they are using a device that doesn't have a mouse, they have to know how to basically do the equivalent of a right mouse click. All right. You want to make your app as easy for people to use as possible. To do that, you want to make it as intuitive as possible. And the old joke used to always be, make it, set it up for a little kid. The difference is little kids can typically figure it out. A lot of times it's older adults that can't figure it out. All right. Again, I think I mentioned this to you maybe a week or so ago. Watching my mother working, with an Android Fire tablet is, I think my 6-month-old granddaughter could probably do a better job, to be honest with you. All right. So, how to define a menu? Well, notice, to do that, you add an XML for the menu to the project's res menu directory. If you don't have a res menu directory, you'll have to create one. Okay? So they start to show it. Now, some of the stuff that's in here is going to be pretty intuitive to you. You won't have to worry about it. You should give it a name. You probably want to give it some kind of a title. All right. But notice what else is in there. You can set up an icon. This is the big one. This show is action. Specifies whether the item is shown on the action bar. Typically, this is set to a value of always, never, or if room. More often than not, I'm going by my own experience. People set them to if room, which means that, especially it's much easier to show it landscape than it is portrait. All right. How to display an option menu? Again, you're going to have to end up doing that in code. Now notice what it says. If you want to do that, you must override the onCreateOptions menu method. So it'll have that @override at the top, and you'll have to put in whatever it is you want to have happen. The good news, and maybe you agree with this, maybe you don't, I don't know, is the fact that when you look here, they give you examples on what it is you have to do. All right. Now, also, if you look over here for the about and all the other stuff, I thought this was kind of neat. It says the code that handles the menu item events. Well, theirs is set up so if you click on a menu item, it brings an associated toast up. All right. That's really, when you think about it, and at least in my opinion, that's a pretty neat way of doing it. All right. And especially if you put it in there for short, it's only going to stay for a couple minutes, or a couple seconds, I should say. All right. And people can look at it. Oh, that's what I want to do. Or I don't want to use that. All right. But it's, to me at least, like I said, it makes more sense to do it that way. So that's what they explain in here. Again, it's not my intention to sit there and read to you. All right. What I have to do is by the end of next week, so by next Friday, and don't get me wrong, I don't expect any of you to be working on this stuff during the break. If you want to, you're welcome to, but in no way am I saying that you should or have to. But the break is 2 weeks from today, the 12th through the 16th. All right, but on the 9th, which is that Friday, I want to give you at least part 1 of what you're going to be doing for the project, so you can start thinking about it. I might give you part 1 and part 2, because part 1 won't involve any code. I want you to kind of draw out what it is you're planning on doing and explain to me in some depth and breadth of coverage what you're planning on doing. All right? I mean, I don't want, it's going to be a calculator, it's going to be cool. No, that's not explaining to me what you're going to do. All right? But if you say, I'm going to do a calculator, I'm going to base it off of one that I found on the App Store, I'm going to kind of clone it, but I'm going to make my own changes to it, and you can explain those, that's good. That's a good start. Again, this will probably be 4 different parts that we'll be working on. Where the first part, you'll be laying everything out. The second part, you'll be kind of, for lack of better words, we'll call it version 1. And it'll be a prototype. And I don't know if you know what a prototype is or not, but I always call it, it's a limited working model without the bells and the whistles. All right, I've worked on projects before. Literally, I've worked on projects where I hear, oh, the boss is coming over after lunch, you've got to do this. And it's, you know, and I'm going out to lunch and it's 11:55. All right, well, it's not, whatever they get's not going to be very good, right? But I can give them a picture of what the screen will look like and some limited functionality. All right, if they put in bad stuff, the program won't yet be able to handle it. All right, where eventually it will be able to handle it. That kind of an idea. All right. So the next thing that they talk about here are, it says if you want to start up a new activity, all right, and remember, when the app it is more than one activity. Here's an example of when you might want to do that. You all know what a splash screen is. You might have a screen that comes up, you know, that maybe has your picture on it or a picture. You know, I know Amin was showing me, he's starting to show me what he was working on for the rock, paper, scissors, and he had a scissors in there. You know, it could be anything. Heck, you could even, I wouldn't probably do this without permission, but if you remember last week, I showed you that video that had the rock, the paper, and the scissors on it. I mean, if you could get their permission, maybe you could even put that on a splash screen. That kind of thing. All right? But I would expect that for your app, you would have a splash screen. Okay? And it can be pretty simple, but it would at least, you know, probably have your name on it and explain what the app is, even if it's just a picture. All right? So it says to do that, you need to create an intent. An intent is an object that provides a description of an operation to be performed. Okay? In this case, you need to create an intent for an activity. What we're going to be moving towards very soon is having more than one screen. Everything we've been doing thus far has been on one screen. That's not really the way it is most of the time in real life, so to speak. Now, you can have a very good app, a very complete app, that only has one screen on it. That's okay. All right. But as you start moving on and the app starts getting more sophisticated, there's at least a good chance you want to have more than one screen. All right. So the author says here, the first code example shows two techniques for starting a new activity. The first uses two statements. The second works the same as the first, but it uses a single statement. So if you look at the differences, all right, here's one, here's the other one. In other words, in the second example, they just combine, bless you, they just combine both steps into one. All right. So it says the second code example shows how to use menu items to start activities. Here the first item starts the settings activity. All right, allows you to change the settings for an app. It says you'll learn about this later on in this chapter. I mean, think about this. All right, because I believe me, this is the kind of stuff I think about. I'm thinking, okay, they've got this app that they've created, this amortization app. What can I add to it? You know, that would allow them to put this stuff in it, so to speak. All right, and I mean, some of the stuff isn't going to be that hard to figure out. In other words, a seek bar, radio buttons, maybe a drop-down list, a list, you know, radio buttons, list items, etc. All right, but some of this stuff is more difficult. All right, you've already put toasts in on your program, so you've already got that in there. So the reason I'm telling you that is when you put in something that's out of range, etc., you're already having a toast that comes up and explains them that. I don't know if you really need a menu item to explain almost the same thing. All right, but I've been trying to come up with, you know, and say, okay, I want this to be something you can do. I want this app to be, this amortization thing to look more and more professional, etc. All right, and I want it to be something that you can maybe use, show both versions. All right, so that you can say, here was the beginning one I did, and here's the updated one. Those can go onto your portfolio. All right, if indeed that's what you want to do. So as they mention here on the bottom of the page, an intent provides a description of an operation to be performed. Intents are commonly used with the start activity method to start activities. And again, typically an activity means you're going to a new screen. All right? All right. There wasn't a lot in there, in my humble opinion. So now they're going to talk about preferences. And they show an example here. Here's some examples of preferences. All right? And there's different ways that you can set this up. All right? So notice, remember tip percent. It's a checkbox. The rounding. Well, they're asking, what do you want to round? So there's different ways that you can set this up. When you use preferences, they're not done for you. They are done for the person who is using the app. You're trying to make it easier for them to use the app. I may have mentioned this before as an example. I took a class in this at the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, or Madison it was. And it was a week-long class. And we talked about all this kind of stuff. And, you know, at the time when I was thinking about it, so much of it didn't make any sense. There wasn't a lot of explanation. He literally just had us bring up code right away and start typing stuff in. And I think he did it because he figured if people had questions, they'd ask. All right, I asked a few, but we had basically a quiet class. But the idea was, again, he was trying to get us into the mindset, programming mindset, but since we didn't know much about it, okay, what would the end user be thinking about? How would we make it easier for them? All right? And we did this, it was some kind of a shopping list type of app. And he had us go out to the App Store. And at the time, there were over 500 of them out there. And out of the 500, I think about 300 to 400 were free. So why are people going to use yours as opposed to mine, as opposed to yours, as opposed to yours? You want to make it as easy to use as possible and as intuitive as possible. If you do that, people will want to use it. People will eventually figure out, oh, well, that's pretty good. All right, and then they'll use it. And again, remember that oftentimes what you do by putting that stuff in there, you might have a down and dirty, cheap freebie version of whatever your app is. And then you put a little message on the bottom or a toast that comes up or whatever. If you're interested in the full-fledged version, which costs only, $3.99 or whatever, go out to this website. That's how you make your money. So that the freebie oftentimes is the hook to get them to get the paid version. All right. So as it says, an app often allows a user to change preferences or settings. As an example, just wanted to show you this. And again, we're going to be going over this in just a minute, but I just wanted to show this to you. So this is my rock, paper, scissors. And while that's coming up, show you this, that I went out and said, you know what, I want to use Packer colors because I'm a Green Bay Packer fan. So I went out, I thought it was kind of cool because I typed in Green Bay Packer green and Green Bay Packer gold. And they both were recognized as in hex codes. All right? So who cares? Why the heck am I even telling you that? Well, it's not finished yet. The reason I'm telling you that is, again, look, maybe you'd want to set that up. Maybe there's another team that, or maybe you want to do this for all teams. Probably not. But for instance, what you could do in the app is you could give the user different color preferences. See what I'm saying? That's an example of using preferences. You might want to give them the opportunity to use different types of fonts. Some fonts are much easier for people to read than others. All right. And again, with the example that I did, there it is. All right. With the example that I did right here, kind of even hard to tell, I thought, when you look at this, but yeah, that is Packer green and Packer gold. Okay. That's my whole interface. There's not much in there, bless you, at least for right now. All right? But we could add some preferences up here that maybe, you know, God forbid somebody was a Chicago Bears fan. All right? Then you could change the background color to blue, and you could change the foreground or the text color, as an example, to orange. You could do something like that. Or maybe you even want to set it up where you let the, you give them a drop down, you give them a color picker, and they pick their own. All right? There's a lot of different ways, again, that this stuff can be done. So Android provides preference APIs that allow you to build an interface that's consistent with the user experience in other Android apps, including built-in apps such as system settings. So how do you define preferences? Shouldn't be a surprise anymore. You again use an XML file. All right? And as it says, the XML for the preferences. Okay? Let's go back. All right, it says for most activities, you use subclasses of the view class to build the user interface. For example, in this book, the tip calculator used the text edit, the edit, etc. When you work with preferences, you use subclasses of the preference class to build the user interface. To start, you add an XML file to the res XML directory. And again, if you don't have a res XML directory, you create it. All right, this XML file is typically called preferences.xml, though it doesn't have to be. Hopefully that makes sense to you that, you know, when you look in your res directory, things like strings.xml, styles.xml, they're intuitive. You can look at them and pretty much have an idea of what they're going to hold. All right? Same thing with preferences if you use that name. When you use the preference API, each preference has a corresponding key value pair that Android saves in a default shared preferences file. So it's when I do this, I want this. When I do this, I want this. You know what key values is, all right, whether you think you do or not. And I've given you that before. We've looked at that before. But to me, kind of the quintessential example of key values is a dictionary. The key is the word you're looking up. The value is the definition for that word. And it's the same kind of an idea. So as it says, here's some attributes that apply to preference items. Take a look at what's there. Again, it involves using code. So notice they've imported android.preferences.preference activity. All right. Then they come up and they create their own class that extends that preference activity. Okay. And I hope this goes without saying, you know, I've been talking to my counterpart, Paul Smith, in St. Louis, and he's like, do you have any idea what your students are going to be doing for their, you know, because he's going to have them do an app too, an app on their own. And I said, no, I haven't passed the stuff out yet. Why? And he said, well, what are you expecting from them? And I said, I expect whatever they do will look professional and it'll work. Well, that's kind of general. Yeah, because I don't know what to expect. You know, I could sit there and list, yeah, you got to do this from Chapter 2, this from Chapter 3, this from Chapter 4. Some of it, depending on the app that you're going to do, might make total sense. And it might, yeah, I can do that, I can do that, I can do that. Then you get to Chapter 12, and it's like, I can't do that in my app. Then why should you spend your time even trying? All right, that would be kind of a waste of your time then. All right. No, well, he's doing things a lot differently than I am. As an example, remember I showed you those UML diagrams where they had it was like a rectangle that was into thirds, and the top third was the name of the class, the middle third were your attributes, and the bottom third were your methods. He's having students draw those for everything they do. I'm not saying they're not important, they are, but I'd rather have you dig it into the code. I think we're going to get farther and create more apps than they will, because I think he's hung up on that stuff, and it's okay. I'm not saying the way he's doing it is better or worse than me. That's the way he's doing it. That's all I'm saying. All right. So when you start to go through this, as they mention here, you can use fragments. What's a fragment? It's part of a screen. Now, fragments can be a really weird thing to work with, because when you start to look at them, I wanted to get to that picture. Yeah, it's way up here. So no, well, I don't know where it is, but I'll find it. Well, when you work, again, if you work with something that's in landscape mode, you've got more room to use. So each row is wider. Does that make sense? All right. That said, there are certain apps that really lend themselves well to being in landscape mode, other ones that lend themselves a lot better to being in portrait mode. All right. That's why, like I said, there are some apps that you can do that a lot of the stuff, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. There's other ones, well, I can do about half that. And why should I hold that against you? Because the app that you've chosen to do doesn't totally match up with everything that's in this book. So they show you examples of using preferences. They even show you how you can break them up. All right, so notice we've got tip percent, so those two go together, then rounding. So if you want to use separators and the like, do you have to do that? No. I mean, it doesn't work any better because you group things. All right? Enabling and disabling preferences. Sometimes if they choose something, all right, for example, maybe if they click that box right there, okay, you've got the box right here, and if you check it, then this becomes ungrayed. And if you not check, it's grayed out. Again, it just depends on what it is you're trying to do. So far in this chapter, you've used the default behavior provided by the Preference API. Now the next figure presents a Java class that shows how to work with preferences. This is often useful if you need to override the default behavior. So in other words, this is what you get out of the box. If you want to make it do something else, that'll mean there's more work on your part. One of the things that I did when I started going through this chapter was I said, you know what, I went over and I went to developer.android.com, and the first thing I did was I did a search on menus. Why? Because sooner or later they're going to show me examples in here. All right? Recommended code, etc. Then I went and did the same thing for preferences. Again, that should always be your point of start, beginning focal point or whatever as you're going through this stuff. And if you say, well, I find this too hard to read, then Google Android menus. And I can guarantee you, not all of them, but if I go Android menus, first one there is the same one I just showed you. All right. Now, but if you look here, here's an example. I haven't gone through this. 101apps.co.za, Android menus tutorial. 101 apps for Android ebooks and tutorials. I don't know if that's any good. All right. I haven't gone through this. I will tell you that tootsplus.com is a really good site. They tend to write really good stuff. All right. But again, if I come in here and type in Android preferences. All right. First one is the one I showed you. And again, you'll notice that most of them that are in here are offshoots of developer.android.com. All right. Building an Android settings screen. There's a guy who's done it. I would tell you that if you're going to go out and look at these, which is fine, all right, I wouldn't go looking at stuff that's 5, 6 years old. I would try to get stuff that's maybe 2015, 2016, and later, because stuff changes over time. And you might put in all the code, and it might not work. That's pretty much it for this chapter. All right. And I was going to give you a break, but why don't we just look at this right now, because then you'll have the rest of the period as a lab. So tomorrow we'll go over fragments first thing, all right? But I'm going to show you what I did. Again, as I mentioned to you at the beginning of class, I literally went back and watched all of these. They're not 50 minutes long each. One of them I think was about 40 minutes. The other ones are about 20 minutes long a piece. All I'm saying, do you have to watch those? Heck no. But if you're having problems getting started, it may help you. I went back and rewrote it because what I wrote wasn't very good, in my opinion. All right, and I'll even show you what I did. So let's just take it from the top. I don't have many controls on here. There's my title, that's the text view. I've got a button for rock, a button for paper, and a button for scissors, and I put the results down here. You can see the way this is set up. I actually said that I had a max lines of 6, and lines were equal to 6. All right? Just to show you, I'm going to run it, and then we'll go back and take a look at everything that's in here. And again, is it that good? No. This is what I asked you to do. So you'll notice it has 6 lines. What the computer chose, what the user chose, who won, how many computer wins, how many user wins, how many ties. I just decided to center everything. I could have just as well left justified it. There's a lot of ways that it could be done. I don't even have a clear button in here. All right. But what I do is I force it so as soon as I click a button, if the user has not picked a new value, or the computer has not picked a new value, I force it to. All right, so I'm going to show you the code that I did to do that in just a second. But before we do, let's just go ahead and look in here. This is that res folder that we were talking about. So again, we mentioned before that if you need to add something to res, you'd add it in here. So under the values, right now, I added my colors, and I just added green and gold. All right, pretty obvious. I didn't do any styles. We're going to look at that tomorrow. All right, but these were my strings. My title, which was rock, paper, scissors. The heading on all 3 of the buttons. That's all I have. All right, not very much, but you know it works, etc. So going back then to my XML and looking at that in text mode, there's not a lot in here. All right, there's the text view that has the title on it. There's the button for the rock, the button for the paper, the button for the scissors, and the text view for the results. As I mentioned, I set the lines up to 6. The other thing I did in here, which we haven't really done much of, is for the title at the top, I set it up for a little bit of padding. 2 dps of padding, so it wasn't butting up right against the top. All right. So let's look at the code. And this is it. And again, if you say, geez, I've got mine done, it doesn't look anything like yours, that's a good thing. All right. So as you can see in here, I've got 3 constants. I don't want to have to say 1, 2, and 3. I want to call them rock, paper, and scissors. So I made rock 1, paper 2, and scissors 3. Okay. Here are my variables. Everything in here is global. I didn't want to worry about passing stuff along. All right. So my text view, that's the 6 lines that hold the results. Choice made, has the computer made a choice or not? So I check, and if it hasn't, I make it make one. All right. This is what the computer chose, rock, paper, scissors. That's what I chose. That's how many computer wins, how many I've won, how many ties there were. All right. This I didn't even put comments for. You'll see what it is as we go on rather. You know, seeding the rand here. So, boy, not too much in here in the onCreate, these two lines. I've got to link up my text view and call begin new game. Well, what's begin new game? It's really small. That's it. It says, I'm assuming that the computer has not made a choice yet because it's a brand new game. So I'm setting that Boolean value to false. Then generate computer choice, that's going to generate a 1, a 2, or a 3 for the computer. And once it's done that, then I go back and I generate the associated string. So if it picked a 1, now I say that it's rock. A 2, it's paper. A 3, it's scissors. All right, so those values, the rock, paper, scissors, that's the value that I end up putting in to those two variables. All right, you'll see that again in a minute. All right, then choice made is true. So there's my whole choice. It's one line. There's a hell of a lot more comments there than there is code. All right, so that's going to pick out a 1, a 2, or a 3. That's the computer choice. So that's what gets stuffed into here. And then I call generate computer string. Well, how did I do that? Again, pretty simple. A big comment. But when you look in here, that's it. If it's a 1, the computer chose rock. If it's a 2, the computer chose paper. If it's a 3, the computer chose scissors. Does that make sense? And that default should never be hit, ever. But just in case, I just set it to rock, and that was arbitrary. I could have set it to any one of the 3. Doesn't matter. All right, then I've got my 3 routines. User chose rock, user chose paper, user chose scissors. Does it make sense to you that those 3, for lack of better words, those 3 routines are virtually identical to one another? It's just the if statements that go inside says if I chose rock and you chose paper, as opposed to you choosing paper and I choosing rock, etc. So the user is rock. How do I know that? Because they chose rock. I don't even think I need this. I think it's already been set. But I said, if for some reason the computer hasn't chosen yet, make the computer choose. That should never happen. I should not be able to get right to that routine without the computer, but just in case. All right? So if the computer chose rock and I chose rock, it's a tie. So I set the winner to tie game, and I add 1 to total tie games. If I chose rock and the computer chose paper, the computer won, right? Paper covers rock. So I do that, and I add 1 to total computer wins. If I chose rock and the computer has chosen scissors, I won, because rock crushes scissors. So you can see exactly what happens. And then I say, show the results. Then for my user chose paper, it's the same thing, except now it's paper. So again, my ifs, same kind of thing, check for the computer not picked yet. These ifs are exactly the same as before. The results are different because now I chose paper. So I figure out who won, or if it's a tie, I call show results. Then I do it again. All right? This is me choosing scissors. Again, make sure that the computer is chosen. Then the exact same ifs, except what goes inside is different. All right? Then show results. And what's show results? That's just that. That's just trying to build that string. And I don't think even the backslash t's even work very well, if at all, in there. I could probably take them out, but it's okay. All right? And that's it. Mine is, what, 263 lines, but I'll bet you if you counted, I would say at least 50 lines of this are comments. All right, if you told me it's closer to 100, I'd believe you. This wasn't meant to be something that you couldn't handle. You've written this routine in other languages. So I figured if you got stuck, you'd go bring up some of your old code from another language and just port it over. All right? But again, last thing then. Not for this first iteration, because it's just the stuff that we've gone through with chapters, with these chapters so far. You know, chapters 1 through 4. Is that it? No, that's the test. That's not it. That's it. So again, in this version 1 of this, as I said, I'm going over my version today. All right. Starting tomorrow, we will incorporate, all right, we will incorporate some of the other stuff. To answer your question, Colin, the first thing I'm going to do tomorrow is I'm going to add an animated GIF to this. All right, and I'll show you how to do that. There's different ways of doing it. I'm going to show you the way I think is the easy way. If you don't like the way I show you, I can give you some references, and there are other ways that you can do it. All right, to me, it would involve the least amount of work. Yes?
I'm wondering if you could show us your layout somehow.
The one for the original one?
Yeah, without it.
Without the pictures. Yeah. I used a relative layout, so I grabbed everything from that site that I'd shown you before. All right. Then there was my text view. Again, I added, and I don't know how that got in there. It should have been at string title, but yeah, that's what it is. It's the string title.
I screwed mine all up because I was trying to add like different sections, so I added like 3 different relative layouts, and then I found out like parent relative layout.
You can do that. Okay. All right. And then the buttons. And there was nothing special at all I did with the buttons. And then my last text view. That's the whole thing. All right. So the rest of the period is yours. You want to take a break now? Take a break. All right. But the rest of the period is yours for you to hopefully get a good jump, at least on version 1 of this. And I'll hand this out. I have to apologize on yours. I had yours on top, and then I grabbed somebody else's, and I started breaking your up. It's on yours. So was it crossed out? Sorry about that. And a couple of you lost points because the first thing I did, just so you know, the first thing I did was I went and ran it, and I put absolutely nothing in it. Nothing. And I hit the button. All right? And to figure out alone. If it gave me an error, you lost points. All right? Because it didn't handle everything it was supposed to handle. I've got all that stuff. Why don't you just keep those? But in case when you do your next test, all right, in case you, when you're working on your next test, in case I do decide to use this amortization one, you'll have that. All right, so what I'm saying is I wouldn't throw that out. And again, I've said this before, no one took me up on it, which is fine. But if any of you want a copy of my code for that loan amortization program, then just email me and say, I'd like a copy of your code. And I'll run it off. All right? Yeah, the rest of the period then is yours.